Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
I never thought a simple rainy Tuesday afternoon in my small apartment in Springfield, Illinois, would upend the careful routine I'd carved out as a single mother juggling shifts at the local diner and endless calls at the customer service desk. But everything shifted when my phone rang with an unfamiliar area code from the city, and the calm, authoritative voice of Mr. Harold Grayson, the family lawyer who'd managed my grandparents' affairs for over 30 years, informed me that Evelyn and Thomas Hargrove had left their entire estate to me alone. A staggering $25 million amassed through decades of shrewd real estate deals across the Midwest that had always seemed like distant legends whispered at holiday gatherings rather than something that could land squarely in my 42-year-old lap, leaving me to drop the wooden spoon into the simmering vegetable soup I'd been preparing for my 10-year-old daughter Lily, my mind reeling from the sudden vision of financial freedom that could erase the mountain of medical bills from my divorce, secure a college fund without loans, and perhaps even allow us to escape the peeling wallpaper and leaky faucets of our rented space for a home of our own where stability wouldn't feel like a constant battle. Overwhelmed by the mix of disbelief and tentative hope that bubbled up as I paced the linoleum kitchen floor, I decided to call my older brother Mark first, figuring the news might bridge the gaps we'd let widen over years of strained Thanksgivings marked by arguments over politics and money, only for his response to erupt like thunder from the other end of the line. His construction business perpetually on the verge of collapse, making him demand immediate details on why our grandparents would exclude the rest of us siblings and cousins who'd supposedly cared for them in their final days at the nursing home, even though I recalled those visits as perfunctory stops filled more with complaints about inheritance prospects than heartfelt conversations. And when my sister-in-law Karen chimed in from the background with her piercing tone, she accused me outright of scheming behind their backs, because no way would Grandpa Tom, the stern patriarch who'd built the family fortune from nothing, reward his wayward granddaughter who chose raising a child alone over staying close to the fold and contributing to the family ventures. I tried to steady my voice through the growing static of their outrage, explaining that Mr. Grayson had emphasized the will's clarity and finality after my grandparents' health had declined rapidly in the last year. Their decision rooted in some unspoken trust they'd placed in me despite the distance. But Mark cut me off with declarations that the money belonged to all of us equally as blood relatives who'd shared barbecues and birthdays, insisting on at least a 75% split to cover his debts and Lisa's failing boutique, his words laced with that entitled Midwestern bravado that masked deeper insecurities I'd seen surface at every reunion when talk turned to finances. And by the time Karen threatened to contest the will through whatever lawyer they could afford, I hung up feeling the first cracks in my excitement, the knot in my stomach tightening as I glanced at Lily coloring quietly in the living room, unaware of how this windfall might either unite or destroy the fragile threads of our extended family. That evening, after forcing down a few bites of the now-cold soup and reading Lily a bedtime story about brave heroines overcoming odds to distract from my own turmoil, I drove the 20 minutes to my grandparents' old Victorian house on the outskirts, where I'd been crashing sporadically to help clear out their belongings, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the downpour as doubts crept in about whether sharing a portion might preserve peace, yet my resolve hardened against it because I'd scraped by without their help during my hardest years, raising Lily on tips and overtime while they doled out advice, but little else, and arriving at the dimly lit porch, I fumbled with my key only to find it useless against a newly installed deadbolt, the door unyielding as rain soaked through my jacket. And taped to the frame was a note in Mark's unmistakable block letters claiming they'd secured the property as a family asset until I agreed to their terms, a brazen overstep that left me stranded in the storm, dialing a locksmith with numb fingers while fury replaced the earlier shock, realizing they'd coordinated this lockout the moment the news broke to pressure me into submission. The locksmith's arrival an hour later cost me a chunk of my meager savings, but as he worked, I scrolled through incoming texts from cousins piling on with sob stories about their own struggles, from Lisa's overdrawn accounts to Uncle Ray's gambling habits. each message underscoring their collective assumption that the fortune was communal property rather than a deliberate choice by two people who'd watched their relatives' patterns with weary eyes. And by the time I stepped inside to find drawers rifled through and photos scattered, the violation hit deeper than the chill from wet clothes, prompting me to gather what personal items I could before crashing on the couch in exhaustion. Dawn broke with more voicemails, Mark's voice now laced with false concern urging a meeting at the family diner to sort this amicably, but intuition told me it was a setup for confrontation. So I countered by contacting an old acquaintance from high school who'd become a paralegal, briefing her on the situation in hushed tones over coffee at a neutral spot. And her advice to involve the authorities for unlawful entry spurred me to call the non-emergency line, leading to a court officer's promise of a welfare check that afternoon, a move that felt both empowering and precarious as I returned to the house mid-morning, bags in hand to face whatever came next. Sure enough, as I unlocked the front door with my newly copied key, engines rumbled in the driveway, and out stepped Mark flanked by Karen and Lisa, their expressions a storm of righteous indignation ready to unleash demands face to face. But they halted abruptly mere feet away, eyes widening at the sight of the uniformed court officer emerging from the side entrance where I'd stationed him earlier, his clipboard of preliminary orders glinting in the pale sunlight, the air thick with unspoken threats as he cleared his throat to address them directly, leaving me to stand tall amid the uncertainty of whether the standoff would deter their aggression or ignite a fiercer battle over the legacy I'd only just begun to claim. Watching my family members freeze like statues caught in a flash flood on the estate's front lawn that crisp morning, their confrontation plans crumbling under the court officer's steady gaze as he recited the temporary restraining order barring any unauthorized access to the property or harassment of the named heir, filled me with a fleeting sense of vindication that cut through the exhaustion from a night spent tossing on the lumpy motel bed where Lily and I had holed up after the locksmith's temporary fix proved insufficient against their bold overreach. But as the officer wrapped up his duties with a professional nod and drove off in his unmarked cruiser, Mark's face twisted into a mask of barely contained fury, his finger jabbing the air toward me while he muttered about how this wasn't over and they'd see me in court for hoarding what was rightfully a shared family pot, a declaration that echoed the entitled mindset I'd grown up around in our tight-knit Midwestern circle where blood ties supposedly trumped all, even when those ties had frayed under the weight of unpaid favors and one-sided expectations during my single-parent struggles. Karen lingered longest, her eyes narrowing with that calculating gleam I'd seen at countless potlucks where she'd size up who owed what, whispering threats about dragging my name through the local gossip mill if I didn't wise up and divvy up at least enough to cover their immediate shortfalls. But I stood firm on the porch steps, arms crossed over my chest as I reminded them in a voice steadier than I felt that the will spoke for itself, and their lock-changing stunt had only solidified my resolve to protect the inheritance for Lily's future rather than bail out grown adults who'd never extended a hand when I needed one most, a stance that no doubt struck many as cold-hearted in a culture that preaches forgiveness and family unity above all. Yet it felt like the only authentic choice amid the swirling uncertainty of whether their next move would involve lawyers or something more personal and vindictive. Retreating inside to the echoing silence of the Victorian house, I sifted through the disarray they'd left behind, drawers half-pulled and papers strewn like confetti from a failed party, and that's when a yellowed envelope tucked behind a bookshelf caught my eye, its contents spilling out as a bundle of letters from Grandma Evelyn dated back to my college days, each one chronicling her quiet pride in my independence, contrasted against the family's mounting demands, including a pointed note about Mark's repeated borrowing from Grandpa's accounts without repayment that had strained their trust to the breaking point, revelations that painted a clearer picture of why I'd been singled out as the sole heir and planted seeds of doubt about the unity they claimed, making me chuckle darkly at the irony of them now playing the victim card when the evidence showed a pattern of self-serving grabs long before my name entered the equation. Those discoveries fueled a resolve that carried me through the afternoon as I met Mr. Grayson in his oak-paneled office downtown. where he outlined the estate's intricacies from the sprawling rental properties generating steady income to the diversified stocks shielding against market dips, advising me to secure the assets immediately against any familial interference. And though the figures danced in my head like winning lottery numbers, the humor in imagining Mark's reaction to learning about the offshore protections nearly made me snort, a light moment amid the tension as Grayson warned of potential contests from disgruntled relatives who might unearth distant claims or emotional appeals to sway a judge. Eviction threats arrived via certified mail that evening, a formal notice from a lawyer I'd never heard of claiming the family had filed as interested parties to reclaim the house as communal property pending review, a maneuver so transparently desperate. It bordered on comical in its overreach, prompting me to counter with my own legal steps by updating the officer's report with photos of the rifled rooms and forwarding Grandma's letters as corroborating context for the will's intent. But the real spark of revenge ignited when I recalled Mark's perennial gripe about that eyesore of an addition to his workshop, a structure he'd slapped together without permits to save on his perpetually cash-strapped business, so in a fit of that sly satisfaction born from years of biting my tongue, I placed an anonymous tip to the county building inspector from a borrowed phone at the library, detailing the violations with just enough specifics to trigger an inspection without implicating myself, knowing the resulting fines would pinch him where it hurt most and serve as a witty reminder that turnabout could feel fair play in this escalating game of greed. By nightfall, as Lily and I settled into a safe for extended stay suite with views of the city, lights that hinted at brighter days ahead, my phone lit up with Mark's irate texts speculating wildly about who might have sold him out, his paranoia confirming the tip had landed. But the growing conflict loomed larger when a group message from Aunt Rita announced an impromptu family summit at the old roadside diner on Route 66 the following morning to hash out terms before things got uglier. A neutral ground loaded with nostalgic weight from childhood road trips that now felt like a trap designed to corner me into concessions, and as I stared at the invitation, a shiver ran down my spine wondering if this gathering would expose cracks in their alliance or unleash a coordinated assault that my solitary stand might not withstand. Staring at the group text from Aunt Rita that buzzed my phone like an unwelcome alarm in the dim light of our temporary suite, the invitation to the family summit at the Route 66 diner carried layers of nostalgia from those summer drives where Grandpa Tom would crank up the radio for classic rock anthems while we kids fought over the window seat. But now it reeked of a calculated ambush, designed to wear down my defenses with emotional pleas and veiled threats under the guise of reconciliation, prompting me to delete the message without a reply and instead spend the evening fortifying my position by reviewing the estate files Mr. Grayson had emailed, each clause reinforcing my grandparents' deliberate choice to entrust me with the $25 million fortune because they'd observed the family's self-interested patterns up close over decades of holidays and hardships that I, as the one who'd quietly navigated my own storms without demanding handouts, seemed least likely to squander on fleeting whims. That decision to skip the meeting felt like a deliberate snub to the heartland value of hashing things out face-to-face that many folks my age swear by after weathering their own kin's dramas. Yet it stemmed from a bone-deep certainty that showing up would only invite more manipulation from those who'd already proven their colors by changing locks and filing bogus claims. A stance that might paint me as the unyielding villain in listeners' eyes who couldn't spare a compassionate gesture for struggling relatives, but in the quiet hours as Lily slept soundly beside me, I clung to it as the thread holding my sanity together amid the uncertainty of how their absence at the diner might fuel even bolder retaliation. The next morning brought a barrage of voicemails and texts painting me as the family pariah for ghosting the summit, Mark's gravelly rant accusing me of arrogance in thinking I could hoard Grandpa's legacy, while Karen followed up with passive-aggressive notes about how Grandma would roll in her grave seeing her granddaughter tear the clan apart over money that could fix everyone's woes. Messages that stirred a wry amusement at their selective memory since those same relatives had skipped my divorce proceedings and Lily's school events citing busyness with their own pursuits. But the harassment escalated when Cousin Lisa appeared uninvited at the diner's parking lot during my lunch break, her boutique apron still dusted with fabric lint as she blocked my car door with tear-streaked cheeks, begging for a private word about how the business her parents had entrusted her with was crumbling under debts that a mere $50,000 from the pot could salvage. Her story laced with details of late-night inventories and pleading calls to suppliers that tugged at my empathy despite the red flags from Grandma's letters hinting at Lisa's history of impulsive spending on trends rather than sustainability. I listened from the driver's seat, engine idling against the midday heat, explaining once more that the will's terms left no room for redistribution without risking the entire estate's integrity. A truth that only fueled her frustration into accusations of selfishness born from bitterness over my single mom life choices, words that hit close to old wounds but hardened my refusal to budge. Even as part of me wondered if a small loan might quiet the storm without compromising my principles, a dilemma that underscored the growing conflict as she stormed off vowing the others would make me regret standing alone. Back at the suite, I delved deeper into the box of family mementos Grayson had suggested I safeguard, unearthing a leather-bound album from the attic crawl space filled with snapshots and annotations in Grandpa's meticulous script, each page chronicling pivotal moments like my high school graduation where I'd earned scholarships through grit while Mark dropped out for quick cash jobs, or the time Lisa pawned an heirloom necklace for a failed venture, subtle clues woven through faded ink that illuminated the favoritism rooted in observed character rather than affection alone. Discoveries that brought a lighthearted scoff at how the photos captured their perpetual lounging against my proactive poses, a visual testament to why the inheritance landed with me and not the complainers now circling like vultures. Seizing on that clarity for a dose of clever revenge, I snapped a few innocuous images from the album and crafted a subtle social media post on the local community page, captioning it with a humorous nod to rediscovering family roots in old pictures. Turns out some branches bear more fruit than others, but the tree stands stronger together, right? Without naming names but tagging the Hargrove family hashtag that everyone in Springfield knew. The post quickly garnering shares and comments from old acquaintances who piled on with knowing chuckles about the clan's reputation for drama, a witty public nudge that exposed their hypocrisy without direct confrontation, and left Lisa fuming in my inbox about the online backlash hitting her boutique's reviews. That small triumph carried me through the afternoon errands, but the atmosphere thickened with impending doom as harassment calls spiked from unknown numbers relaying warnings to watch my mail for surprises from the family's pooled legal fund, keeping me on edge until dusk when a nondescript delivery van pulled up outside, the driver thrusting a plain cardboard package into my hands with no sender details or return address, its weight and the faint scent of aged paper hinting at contents that could either bolster my case or unravel everything I'd fought to hold on to, leaving me frozen in the doorway as Lily called from inside about dinner, the uncertainty coiling tighter around what secrets it might unleash next. Hesitating in the doorway of our suite with the mysterious package clutched under one arm while Lily's voice echoed from the kitchen asking if the delivery was from Grandma's stuff, the plain brown box felt heavier than its size suggested, carrying not just paper, but the potential to tip the scales in this family feud that had escalated from petty lockouts to outright threats shadowing my every move since the inheritance news broke just weeks ago, and as I set it down on the coffee table under the warm glow of the lamp, slicing through the tape revealed stacks of photocopied bank records, forged affidavits bearing signatures eerily similar to Grandpa Tom's, and a typed anonymous note detailing how Mark had enlisted a disreputable attorney in Chicago to fabricate claims of undue influence on the will, claiming I'd manipulated our grandparents during their vulnerable final months to secure the $25 million for myself alone, evidence so meticulously gathered it screamed of an insider's betrayal, perhaps from Aunt Rita's circle who'd always whispered about the clan's financial woes at those tense Easter dinners where resentment simmered beneath the surface like overcooked casserole. Those documents hit like a gut punch, confirming the subtle hints from the old letters and photos about Mark's history of bending rules for quick gains. From that teenage joyride in Grandpa's truck that ended in a cover-up to the business loans he defaulted on without a second thought, patterns that explained why Evelyn and Thomas had quietly rewritten their estate plans to safeguard against such opportunists, leaving me as the anchor they trusted despite my own life choices pulling me away from the family fold. And though a bitter chuckle escaped at the irony of them accusing me of coercion when their scheme reeked of desperation, the humor faded into a steely determination because my refusal to entertain even a partial settlement, no matter how it might appease the audience's sense of fairness in sharing windfalls among kin, stood as the line I wouldn't cross, a choice born from years of independence that now felt like both shield and burden in this vortex of uncertainty. Armed with the package's revelations, I forwarded scans to Mr. Grayson late that night from my laptop, his return email buzzing back with urgent advice to file for an emergency injunction and loop in the district attorney for potential fraud charges. Steps that propelled me into a whirlwind of calls the next day, consulting the private investigator who'd already flagged suspicious transfers in the family's joint account set up for their legal push, his gravelly confirmation that the forgeries traced back to a print shop frequented by Lisa, adding another layer of betrayal that made my stomach twist at how deep the conspiracy ran among those I'd once shared backyard barbecues with under summer stars. The conflict boiled over that afternoon when I ventured to the estate under the protection of the updated court order to inventory valuables, only to find Karen and Uncle Ray lurking in the side yard pretending to inspect the fence, their feigned innocence crumbling as they cornered me near the garage with demands for an immediate sit-down to end this madness, before the whole town talked. Karen's voice rising in that familiar shrill pitch about how Lily deserved aunts and uncles, not a mother playing lone wolf over money that could knit the family back together, words designed to exploit my maternal instincts and the cultural pull toward reconciliation that tugs at so many in our age group who've mended fences after worse rifts. In the heated exchange, with Ray looming like a shadow from my childhood fishing trips now soured by greed, I spotted an opportunity for revenge that was as clever as it was contained. Pulling out my phone under the pretense of calling for backup and instead hitting record while suggesting we hash it out right there on a group video chat with the others, baiting them into venting their frustrations freely, and sure enough, as Mark joined from his truck speaker, he ranted about overriding the will through whatever means necessary, including leaning on witnesses to swear I'd coerced the signatures. An admission captured crystal clear that exposed their underbelly without me uttering a single accusatory word, the satisfaction washing over me like cool rain on a humid day as I ended the call with a polite thanks for their honesty, pocketing the file to bolster Grayson's case, while they fumed in confusion over my calm demeanor. That evening blurred into preparations for the hearing Grayson scheduled for dawn the following day, but the impending doom pressed in with a string of anonymous calls breathing heavy silence or garbled warnings about consequences if I pushed too far, keeping sleep at bay until I finally dozed fitfully, only to jolt awake at first light and drive to the estate with the injunction papers tucked in my glove compartment, positioning myself on the front steps amid the dew-kissed lawn to await any uninvited guests, heart hammering with a mix of anticipation and dread over whether this legal hammer would finally deter them or provoke a desperate last stand. Engines growled in the distance soon enough, a convoy of familiar vehicles screeching into the driveway with Mark at the helm, Karen and Lisa spilling out behind him with faces set for battle, marching forward with a sheaf of their own counterfeit documents waving like white flags turned weapons, but they skidded to a collective halt just yards away, eyes bulging at the court officer stepping out from the porch shadow where I'd arranged his ambush overnight, his badge catching the rising sun as he unfolded the fresh orders revoking their access and citing the recorded threats, the air crackling with stunned silence that promised the climax of our saga hung perilously close. Witnessing my family's advance halt abruptly on the dew-slicked driveway of the Victorian estate that golden autumn morning, their aggressive momentum dissolving into wide-eyed paralysis at the sight of the court officer unfolding his documents with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel, sent a rush of adrenaline through me that mingled triumph with the lingering uncertainty of whether this meticulously planned intervention would finally dismantle their siege or merely provoke a more chaotic backlash from relatives who'd invested so much pride in their entitled crusade to seize the $25 million inheritance they'd convinced themselves belonged to the collective rather than one steadfast granddaughter. Mark recovered first, his burly frame puffing up as he thrust forward with a counterfeit petition clutched in his fist, barking questions at the officer about jurisdiction and demanding to know why a simple family discussion warranted such overkill. But the man in uniform stood unmoved, his voice steady and authoritative as he served each of them personally with the emergency injunction that not only barred further interference, but referenced the damning recordings of their admitted coercion tactics. Details pulled from the anonymous package and my baited conversation that exposed their forgery attempts in stark, irrefutable terms, leaving Karen to clutch her throat in theatrical horror, while Lisa shrank back, her earlier tears now genuine streams of regret that hinted at fractures in their united front, a subtle twist revealing she'd been the reluctant whistleblower who'd slipped me the evidence after overhearing Mark's rants late into the night. As the officer methodically explained the potential criminal charges looming for fraud and trespass, including how their pooled funds traced back to misappropriated family assets Grandpa had flagged years ago, I stepped forward from the porch shadows, my voice calm but laced with that wry humor born from enduring their antics for decades, pointing out how their grand confrontation had backfired spectacularly, much like Mark's unpermitted shed that inspectors were no doubt fining him for right now, a light jab that drew uncomfortable shifts and averted eyes, underscoring the witty revenge of turning their own sloppy schemes against them without descending into the mudslinging they'd perfected at every reunion. The air thickened with stunned murmurs as they processed the blow, Uncle Ray muttering about appeals while Aunt Rita, arriving late in her sensible sedan, gasped at the unfolding scene and pulled Mark aside for a heated whisper that suggested even she questioned the depth of their overreach. But before they could regroup into fresh demands, my phone vibrated with an incoming video call from Mr. Grayson, his face appearing on screen from the courthouse steps where he'd raced to file the final motions, and in a moment that felt scripted for dramatic irony, he announced the probate judge's swift ruling upholding the will in full, triggered by the revelation of a sealed codicil my grandparents had embedded 2 years prior, stipulating that the fortune transferred only to the heir who demonstrated unwavering resistance to familial pressures and manipulations, a prescient safeguard validated by the very evidence of threats and forgeries that now sealed their exclusion, a clever twist that made me imagine Grandma Evelyn's knowing smile as she'd confided similar suspicions in her letters about the clan's grasping tendencies. That disclosure rippled through the group like a shockwave, Mark's face draining of color as he realized their aggression had fulfilled the codicil's exact condition, handing me the estate on a silver platter while dooming their claims to dismissal. And though Lisa stepped forward with a choked apology about how she'd warned me out of lingering loyalty to the grandparents' true wishes, her words came too late to bridge the chasm I'd carved by refusing any olive branches, a choice that no doubt frustrated listeners rooting for some redemptive family hug amid the American dream of unity prevailing over discord. Yet it affirmed my path of self-preservation, forged through solitary years of raising Lily without their support. With the officer escorting them off the property amid grumbled protests and one last futile plea from Karen about how this would shatter holiday gatherings forever, I retreated inside to the sunlit study where Grandpa's old desk still held the scent of polished oak, sifting through the now secure documents as the first wire transfers pinged on my account. The weight of $25 million settling like a long-withheld breath finally released, but the satisfaction of this ultimate revenge, witty in its reliance on their hubris to activate the codicil and expose their flaws to the light, carried an undercurrent of isolation that echoed through the empty rooms, prompting me to wonder as Lily bounded in with questions about our new life if true victory meant rebuilding alone or if the fractures we'd inflicted ran too deep for any mending. As dusk painted the windows in amber hues, and I packed the last of the mementos into boxes for our fresh start in a modest home far from Springfield's whispers, the ambiguity lingered like unanswered prayers at a graveside. Had I honored my grandparents' faith by standing unyielding, or merely traded one form of bondage for the solitude of a guarded fortune? Questions that swirled without resolution, leaving the future a canvas of possibilities shadowed by the what-ifs of kinships forever altered and the quiet ache of paths not taken.